Okay, so let's talk about a few more theories of how we might socialize our sexual orientation. Again, looking to Freud, ego development. So Freud argued that our ego is the rational part of our brain that determines whether we should go with what our id wants, which is whatever feels good, and what our superego wants, which would be, to do the right thing and always be, restrained in our behaviors. So Freud suggested that maybe, our ego has to decide between good and evil. In other words, so the superego being good and the id being evil. The id is supposed to be made up of aggression and sexual instincts. The superego is made up of, internalized morals. So Malin in 1982 explored the possibility, or theorized, that if you have internalized messages from your environment that homosexuality is wrong, and that's become part of your superego, that will cause a person who maybe feels oriented towards people of their own sex it'll make them feel guilty. It'll make them engage in self-deprecating behavior, saying that, they, even to themselves, that this is wrong, I'm not a good person, this is bad, things like that. And to protect the ego from the fact that they feel one way and that they, like they're oriented towards their same sex, but that they feel like it's wrong, they may invoke defense mechanisms. And so for Malin, a lot of negative behaviors that we see people engage in toward homosexuals might be a function of defense mechanisms that they're using, that the perpetrators are using to protect their own ego from the truth that they in fact have homosexual impulses or things like that. Because our ego fuels our identity formation, and because our ego supports our self-esteem, we use defense mechanisms to protect it from the truth. So we don't have any really scientific evidence to support the things that Malin suggested, except for that a lot of people have argued that homophobic behavior is really just a gigantic defense mechanism that people who have homosexual impulses and feel uncomfortable about it use to make themselves feel better, right? To deny the truth about themselves. So, but there's no scientific evidence to support that Malin's theory, this process, is the reason why some people are gay. It's not even really a good, it hasn't been well supported as an explanation for why some people are mean to gay people. So I really don't have any good evidence for that. We do know, however, from more recent research that people who carry self-stigma about anything, where they actually think anything about themselves is a bad thing, tend to have more psychological distress than people who don't carry around self-stigmas. So it is distressing for anyone who thinks that something about themselves is unworthy, undesirable, morally wrong. It's psychologically distressing in any topic, and presumably that would be true if you have internalized a message that it's wrong to be oriented towards people of your same sex, and you are oriented towards people of your same sex, and you have to confront that. You think it's wrong, and yet you are doing it, or you want to do it, or you feel that way. So logic from this other research suggests that probably there might be a certain amount of self-deprecation and guilt that might come along with being oriented in a way that a person doesn't respect in themselves. So that brings us to the issue of how do we recognize what our sexual orientation is? I've been mentioning things that you shouldn't use as the defining factor, like your finger lengths and stuff like that, but how do we recognize orientation? Well, first off, I mentioned earlier in class that there is evidence that we can really quickly recognize orientation in somebody's face in just like really brief flashes. If the face is presented upright, we've got it in the left panel. If the face was presented upside down, we've got it on the right panel on this graph. The person depicted in the picture was a female face in the gray bars and a light gray bar if it was a male face. And on the y-axis, we see the accuracy that people displayed. And so when the face was female, people were way more accurate in general. But people are above the 50%. I mean, the baseline would be 50%, and that's chance. It's either gay or straight are your two choices. And what they found is that people are way better than chance, and especially with women, way better than chance at detecting the sexual orientation. So, and you see how the picture was made. So they took away hair and clothes and other things that could be cues, and all we've really got left is legitimately their faces. So people can recognize it better than we might think. And so I always like to mention that, because as part of the coming out process, a lot of times people think that no one else can tell unless they say it. And sometimes when people come out, they're surprised by the responses that they get when people say, well, I always thought you were gay, or I thought everyone knew you were gay. And the person who's coming out has made this big monumental decision to share this deep thing that they think they might possibly be rejected for. And then to be told that people already suspected can be really disorienting and distressing. So I always like to point out that there are cues that people pick up in people's faces that make it a little bit more obvious than the person themselves might think. But the coming out process is a difficult one, because you not only have to, reveal yourself to other people, but you have to understand, accept, and value your own sexual orientation. You have to realize that, there are a lot of variations in people's sexual behaviors and desires and things like that, and accept that, understand that, value it, and say that it's okay, and it doesn't matter how anybody else might react. I have to value myself. So the steps in coming out. First off, you have to come out to yourself. And that theory that I just showed you that Malin advised, Malin developed, kind of suggests that a lot of times if we've been given the impression that there's only one right orientation, this process might take longer than you would think, that the person might deny it and use defense mechanisms and stuff like that longer than you might think, because it's really threatening to come out to yourself. Usually for most people, the next level of people that they share it with is other people who have self-identified as lesbian or gay or bisexual or transgender or queer, where the person coming out feels like they probably won't be rejected, where it's going to be like my first time saying this out loud, and I'm going to say it with people who I know won't reject me. So a lot of times it's other LGBTQ members or people who they have self-identified. Ultimately, lastly, they'll start coming out to heterosexuals, who are the people that the person coming out are most fearful will probably reject them. And so they usually save that for last when they're feeling more confident. So some things to consider is in the coming out process is, what is my relationship with this person? I mean, if it's a very superficial relationship, there probably isn't a ton of need for them to know anything about you, let alone your sexual orientation, right? Because I really don't know this person that well, or it's a temporary relationship or something like that. If it's your boss, it's really none of their business and they're not allowed to ask, so you don't need to tell. And then you start to wonder, well, but should I tell, right? And then it starts getting more complex, right? So if you decide, yeah, I probably should tell this person with whom I am in some kind of relationship, and I probably need to let them know, when is the appropriate stage in a relationship? When is the appropriate, setting for me to reveal? And then, what resources are available to help me with this? Like, for example, a child coming out to their parent might want to bring some members of GLAAD with them, Gay Lesbian Alliance members, who will help the parent or the siblings or somebody to realize, what it is like to be a friend of a person who's gay, or a parent of somebody who's gay or something, because the parent or the sibling or whoever you're in a relationship with may not really know what to do with this information or what it means for them. Because let's just be honest, a lot of times our concerns are pretty self-oriented. A lot of times we're worried about what this means for me. And so providing support to the people that you're coming out to, but then also making sure that you have proper support as a person who's coming out is really super important, because, the biggest risk that people coming out have is that the people that they're coming out to will reject them and make them feel bad. And so having a support network that will help to soothe those feelings of fear and help, if the worst case scenario does happen, help to put it in perspective and stuff like that, is really super important. Because if you think about it, our self-concept is made up of a lot of things that might be impacted by our sexual orientation, right? Because we've got things like our hopes and our dreams. Now, if you start writing down like what I in my lifespan development class, I have my students write down their lifelines, where like 10 important things that have happened so far in your life and 10 important things that you expect to happen in your future. And students will write down things like having children, getting married, things like that. If you think about those hopes and dreams, and you think about the role of sexual orientation in the achievement of those dreams, you start to realize, okay, this could really affect a person's self-concept, because maybe I still want to have children, but maybe it's not going to work the way it would if I was heterosexual. It's possible, but it's different, right? So you might have to alter your hopes or your dreams. You might have to modify or whatever to make them still achievable through now your new identity, your new self-concept that you have finally accepted about yourself. Part of your self-concept is who your friends are. And if you have these people, let's say, who have been friends with you since you were a little kid, and you guys have been since kindergarten, you've lived in the same neighborhood, you've run around with each other, done all these things together, they are part of your identity. The idea of them rejecting you can be really, really threatening. The idea that you might have to leave them behind in order to fulfill your full self can be really threatening. A lot of times people will stay friends with people who are actually harmful or toxic to them because we've always been friends. It's like part of my self-concept that I'm friends with that person, even if this isn't a healthy relationship for whatever reason. So it's something that, people think about, and what kind of partner they're going to have in life. It's an important thing, right? How might this impact my career? How will my family treat me differently or better or worse as a function of this? How will I be viewed by the community? These are all things that people worry about. And so it's not a small thing. But I always like to end this little conversation with that idea that, like I said, people might already know. They might already have a good suspicion. And the fact that they're still your friends, the fact that they still love you as family members, the fact that take that to heart and know that this person probably already has a small inkling, if not a pretty strong guess. So it's probably not as risky as you might think. It always makes me really, really sad when people wait to come out, and then when they do come out, they find out that everybody already kind of knew, and they could have been living more authentically the whole time. You know what I mean? They could have been themselves with people the whole time, rather than feeling like they had a secret. Our goal for all of us is to live an authentic life, right? To have a match between who we really are and how we act in the world and what we project to other people. So to live an authentic life is everybody's goal. And of course, we have the additional issues of, trying to avoid discrimination, trying to avoid being rejected. I think being authentic makes it less likely that people will reject you. Sometimes people who come out to their friends find that their friends do end up rejecting them, and they go, see, I knew that was going to happen. And then their friends will say, I rejected them because they think that they were lying to me this whole time and we were supposed to be friends. And they'll oftentimes say they think they were lying to me this whole time because I already kind of knew. And then they had this big coming out process, like they were telling me something that I didn't already know, and they were acting like I might have rejected them. How good of friends could we have been if this is how they regarded me this whole time? So sometimes a person ends up getting rejected by their friends, not because they're being rejected because of what they just said, but because their friends are offended that they were that they were being purposely misled. They feel like. The good news is people quite often, after their initial hurt feelings, whatever, fear, whatever, a lot of times they come back. And so there may be a moment or year or longer of discomfort and disconnect, But a lot of times people just need to sit with information. They need to sit with the new situation. It takes them a while to react. It takes them a while to figure out what to do. It takes them a while to realize, wait, this is my friend who I've always loved, and why am I acting like this? And this is not just about coming out. I'm thinking about a lot of things where people need to sit with it a little bit, and their first reaction might be bad. It might make you think that they've just rejected you, when in fact they're just trying to figure it out. They're just trying to figure out how they feel about something. It can be dangerous, though. I mean, high school students oftentimes put off coming out because of fear, and then look at these rates of suicide among gay and bisexual males. So the percent of people of males who are gay and bisexual who attempt suicide in a year is about 28%. Among lesbian bisexual females, it's about 20%. And it's much lower for heterosexual males. Heterosexual females have a lot of suicide attempts also, and that's something that we psychologists are really interested in. These are attempts, by the way. A lot of times attempts are cries for help, or cries for, you need to understand me. I'm so scared, or so in turmoil over this, that you need to take this seriously. Is what a lot of times suicide attempts are about. And so when we see this high rates of suicide attempts, these are not completions. Heterosexual males have a lot of completions. So these are attempts, and they oftentimes are cries for acceptance and understanding. So prejudice, discrimination, and the gay rights movement. I'm going to go over a lot of different things that have been happening lately, and actually I just updated these charts, so hopefully, I mean, I just literally maybe 4 months ago updated these charts. If I see any that are old, that have become superfluous again, I'll let you know, because I forgot to review this before I started this. So some laws against discrimination based on sexual orientation. So here's a graphic from US map showing us those states that have, in the darkest purple, laws against discrimination on the basis of sexual orientation, gender identity, in any kind of employment situation. So that could be state employees, federal employees, or private employment. Usually when we're talking about private employment, there's a cutoff of how many employees need to work at that place before these laws actually kick in. So it's usually for companies that employ 50 or more people. In the blue, we have those states that have laws against discrimination based on sexual orientation in any kind of employment setting. In the magenta, it would be laws against discrimination based on sexual orientation and gender identity, but only for those people who work for the state. The federal government actually covers everybody, but as far as state-by-state differences, this would be for state employees. But then there's no laws in those states regarding what private employers of any size are required to do. In the blue or teal or whatever that color is, this would be where they have laws against discrimination based on sexual orientation only in state employment. No impact on private employers. And then the ones that are gray, they don't have any state level protection for any kind of LGBT employee for any job spec, state or private. So you can see the West Coast, the middle, in certain places, and the Northeast seem to have the most protection. And then sort of the Midwesty, Southeast, like the whole Southeast has no laws against that. How about laws prohibiting gay and lesbian sexual behaviors? Sodomy is officially defined as anal sex, a penis penetrating an anus. But when we use the phrase sodomy laws, we're talking about anything other than coitus. So oral sex would fall in that category, sex with sex toys that are penetrating either a vagina or an anus, and then a penis and an anus. Okay, so what we see in this graphic is when the laws were repealed in each state. So you see that Illinois was the first state in 1978 to strike down sodomy laws. So they were the first, what they call consenting adult state. If you're both adults and you're both consenting to whatever you're doing, it's none of our business what you're doing. The yellow states struck down those laws next. So sometime between 1978 and 1989, all the yellow states repealed those laws. The orangish, peach colored states repealed those laws between 1990 and 2002. And then the red states, they had them struck down for them by the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court struck this down in struck down all these laws in the wake of a case in Georgia that happened in the early 00s, like probably 2000 or 2001, I think, where the police were serving a warrant on a house and, kicked the door in to go serve the warrant. And they actually came to the wrong house. They were serving like a drug warrant or something like that. They came to the wrong house and burst in and found two gay men engaging in fellatio. And so they were in the wrong house, but they just witnessed them engaging in sodomy as defined by the Georgia state legislature. And so they arrested them under the sodomy laws. And this was ultimately taken to the Supreme Court. And, we had two consenting adults doing stuff in the privacy of their own home that was invaded by accident by authorities. And so this ultimately went to the Supreme Court, and it was shown to be unconstitutional to tell people that they can't engage in certain sexual acts. Prior to 2003, it was illegal to sell dildos in Texas. So a lot of things have changed in the past, 13 years. How about bans on same-sex marriage? Well, this one you have to watch in an animation because, it started with a couple of states, and then slowly more states got added, and slowly more states got added, until ultimately the Supreme Court made a blanket change of law for the entire country. So now in the U.S., same-sex marriage is legal in all 50 states because of the same process that the sodomy laws were struck down, right? The Supreme Court declared everybody has the right to marry whoever they want. Okay, how about hate and sexual orientation? Like I said earlier, a lot of theorists think that people who are inordinately hateful towards people based on their sexual orientation are actually displaying Freudian defense mechanisms. Freud says to protect our egos from the truth about ourselves, oftentimes we'll do stuff to sort of give the impression that we don't really have those characteristics. So for example, if a person is attracted to somebody of their same sex, that's their initial gut reaction is, "Ooh, that person's very good looking, I like them," or whatever. And then their conscious brain, their super ego kicks in and says, "Oh, but that's wrong. You shouldn't be attracted to people of your same sex." The person will display the defense mechanism called reaction formation, where they'll actually change their reaction to something that they feel more comfortable with. So they had been physiologically aroused by the person of their same sex. They change the reaction to the physiological arousal is actually disgust, or the physiological reaction is actually anger. I'm not attracted, I'm disgusted. I'm not attracted, I'm angry. So that they can feel like they're fulfilling whatever they were socialized to do or whatever they feel comfortable with. There's also the issue of projection, which is another defense mechanism, where a person is feeling or has a certain attitude about something and they don't feel comfortable about it. So they project that feeling or attitude onto somebody else, and then they can defend against it because the other person's the one who holds that feeling. So for example, if the person feels attracted to somebody of their same sex and they feel uncomfortable about it, they'll defend their ego by saying that person of my same sex feels attracted to me, and that person of that same sex is probably going to come on to me. Oh, and that's disgusting, and that's wrong. I can't believe that. And so by taking their own feeling, projecting it onto the other person, now they can act outraged or offended or angry or whatever they feel justified in doing. So those are some examples of what could lead to homophobia. Homophobia, insecurity about being heterosexual. Because that's what Freud's basically saying with these defense mechanisms. If we feel uncomfortable about something, we actually project or react. It can lead to gay bashing, right? I'm disgusted. I'm angry. If only there weren't all these gay people here, I wouldn't be feeling these uncomfortable feelings, right? So I just wish there were no gay people. And so I go and protest at their funerals or whatever thing to make myself feel better in the face of the fact that I'm actually attracted to people of my same sex. So it's all a big defense mechanism. Oh yeah, here's those. Aren't there like 10 members of this church that goes and protests like this? But they get so much playtime on TV. Which brings us to hate crimes. Those people go and protest funerals. Very attractive. and say really mean things. But sometimes there are crimes that are committed because people are homophobic or Freudian defense mechanism or whatever. So here we have a map of the status of hate crime laws based on sexual orientation and gender identity. And so you see again, the West Coast, it's basically the same states that protect them in employment are going to protect them in hate crime situations. And then you see in the blue states, it's based on sexual orientation, you have protection against hate crime. And then in the gray ones, they don't have any laws. Some people look at the states that don't have any hate crime laws and say how backwards they are, and are they actually for hate and things like that. What the people in those states will oftentimes point to is that if you protect certain groups against hate, it's like by definition implying that other people who don't belong to that group can't be the victims of crime as a function of hate. And so they're saying all people who perpetrate any of these crimes for any reason are going to be punished the same way. And a lot of times those states are the ones that have death penalties and other kinds of things there. And they say things like, well, how much more punishment can we mete out anyway? So different states have sort of different rationales and justifications for the laws that they possess. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're pro-hate when they don't have hate crime laws. That's important to note. When we look at hate crime incidents by year, you see sort of some fluctuation on the total number, and this stops in 2006. I haven't been able to find a more current graphic that shows since 2006. But so you see hate crime incidents going kind of up and down a little bit depending on the year. The blue subset of those hate crimes would represent those that are based on sexual orientation. And now we have to remember, not all states have any hate crime law at all, let alone ones that are based on sexual orientation. So we, have to take those a little bit of a grain of salt. But you see a lot of stability in the numbers. So it seems pretty consistently that about somewhere around 15% of all hate crimes seem to be based on sexual orientation. And if we look at this graphic, it's more like 20% based on this graphic, which is from 2012. So given that my graphic on the right stops in 2006 and my graphic on the left is from 2012, we get kind of an impression that maybe the rates of hate crimes based on sexual orientation might be going up. But I don't have that nice continuous pattern to substantiate that assertion. All I can say is it was about 15.5 in 2006, and it's about 19.6 today, well, in 2012. Even this is old data. Here's a shocking fact for those of us who are in the Seattle area. Seattle is number 3 for they're the third highest rate of hate crime incidences against LGBT people in 2012 in cities that have at least 200,000 residents. So Washington, D.C. is always number 1 in all the bad stuff. So we got Washington, D.C., then we've got Memphis, and then we've got Seattle. And this is a little surprising. Seattle Times published this because they were a little, it's kind of a surprising piece of data because we have a lot of LGBT people in Seattle. We have a lot of laws that are supposed to be protective and supportive, and yet we have the third highest rates of LGBT hate crimes. One interpretation of this is that because we're supportive in this state and because we have laws that protect and because we have hate crime laws, it makes it more likely that victims will correctly report, what's happened to them, and then, they are actually filed and actually taken seriously. So it may just be actually a representation of how seriously we take hate against LGBT people in this state. Or it could be some Freudian defense mechanism kind of thing causing people to lash out against what some people who are really conflicted and stuff like that perceive to be a group that's getting too much attention or something. So it's hard to know, are the rates actually higher or are the reporting rates higher? I really hope it's the second one, right? I really hope that that's the truth, but I don't know, and I don't have the data that would help to parse out this what appears to be a pretty big conundrum between Seattle being the way Seattle is, and then this really high rate of reporting. Of course, we are nothing compared to Washington, D.C. Do you see that? We're 3.0. hate crime incidents per 100,000 of population. Look at Washington, D.C., 7.3. Washington, D.C. has got some significant issues with HIV infection and, hate crimes, drug use, all sorts of stuff going on in that city. So, I mean, it's definitely, they need to look inside, don't they? But we need to look inside and wonder why that number is so high, and I hope it's because of the reporting rates. All right, well, I think that's enough on this topic, so we will come back and discuss Chapter 12 in the next segment.